The ground shook as another explosion tore through the valley. Lieutenant Kim Tae-ho pressed his back against the rocky wall and checked his rifle. Only 12 shots left. Around him, the sounds of battle grew quieter. Not because the fighting had stopped, but because there were fewer voices screaming. The Vorthan Empire had come to Kepler 442b like a storm. Their black ships had filled the sky 3 days ago. Their war machines walked on 6 legs and shot beams of light that could cut through armor like paper. The Galactic Coalition had sent their best forces to stop them. It had not been enough. Tae-ho looked at his small group of survivors. They were hiding in a narrow pass between 2 mountains. 5 beings from 4 different worlds. All that remained. Of a battalion that had numbered 200 just this morning. Yunmina knelt beside a wounded Saurid soldier. Her medic bag was almost empty, but she kept working. Blood covered her hands. The Saurid was twice her size, with scales like green armor and teeth like knives. But his eyes showed the same fear that lived in every soldier's heart. "How bad is it?" Tae-ho asked quietly. Mina looked up. Her face was tired but determined. "He will live if we can get him to a medical station, but not if we have to run much further." Near the entrance to the pass stood Rylak, another Saurid. This one was a warrior, not a wounded soldier. His people were known across the galaxy for their strength in battle. But even Rylak looked worried as he watched the valley below. Smoke rose from burning vehicles. Bodies lay scattered like broken toys. "The humans were supposed to be the weak ones," Rylak muttered. His voice sounded like rocks grinding together. "Your people break so easily. Why did the Coalition even bring you to this fight?" Tae-ho did not answer. He had heard words like this before. Humans were smaller than most alien species. They had weaker bodies and shorter lives. Their technology was not as advanced. Many aliens wondered why humans had been accepted into the Coalition at all. Quinn, the crystalline Vithrak, stood near a pile of equipment they had salvaged. Her body looked like living glass, and when she moved, light danced across her surface. Her people were engineers and scientists. They thought in numbers and formulas. "The tactical situation is clear," Quinn said in her musical voice. "We have limited ammunition, no heavy weapons, and no support. The probability of survival decreases. By 12% every hour we remain here." The last member of their group was Boros, a Thurian who stood nearly 3 meters tall. His people were born warriors from a heavy gravity world. Muscles like steel cables covered his massive frame. He carried a weapon that most humans could not even lift. "Then we fight until we die," Boros said simply. "It is better than running like scared children." Tae-ho moved to the edge of the pass and looked down at the valley. Vorthan machines moved through the smoke like metal spiders. Their legs left deep prints in the mud. Soon they would find this hiding place. Soon the war would end for all of them. But Tae-ho had been listening to their radio. Other Coalition forces were still fighting on different parts of the planet. They needed to know what the survivors had learned about Vorthan weapons. Quinn had been studying the enemy technology. She had found weaknesses, frequency patterns that could be exploited, information that could save thousands of lives. "We need to get that data to command," Tae-ho said, pointing to Quinn's equipment. "How long would it take to reach the extraction point?" Quinn calculated quickly. 4 hours of travel time. But the Vorthans will detect us within the first hour. We cannot avoid their patrols. Mina looked up from her patient. "What if we split? Up? Some of us draw their attention while others escape with the data." Rylak snorted. "None of us are fast enough to outrun their machines, and we do not have enough firepower to fight them." Tae-ho studied the pass around them. It was narrow, maybe 20 meters wide at its widest point. The walls rose straight up on both sides. It was a perfect bottleneck. An idea began to form in his mind. "What if we do not try to outrun them?" he said slowly. "What if we make them come to us?" Boros looked interested. "Explain." Tae-ho pointed to the walls of the pass. "This is the only way through the mountains for 50 kilometers. If the Vorthans want to follow our people, they have to come through here. One person could hold this position for hours." The group fell silent. They all understood what he was suggesting. One person would die, Mina said quietly. Yes, Taiho agreed. But 4 people would live, and the information would reach command. Relax stepped closer. You cannot be serious. You are human. You would last maybe 10 minutes against their war machines. Taiho smiled. It was not a happy smile. Maybe, but I have some advantages you do not know about. He began gathering equipment from their supplies. Explosive charges meant for demolition work, medical supplies that could be turned into incendiary devices, electronic components that Quinn had been studying. My people have a long history of impossible fights, Taiho said as he worked. We have always been smaller and weaker than our enemies, so we learned to be clever instead of strong. Quinn watched him work with growing interest. What are you planning? Taiho showed them his design. He would use the explosive charges to bring down parts of the cliff walls, create choke points within the choke point, force the Vorthon machines to come at him one at a time instead of in groups. The medical supplies would create smoke screens. The electronic components would jam their targeting systems. It is brilliant, Quinn admitted. Primitive but mathematically sound. You could multiply your effectiveness by a factor of 20. Boros nodded with respect. You think like a true warrior, but Mina shook her head. Even if it works, you will still die. There are too many of them. Taiho finished his preparations and looked at each of his companions. These beings had started the day thinking humans were weak. Now they were trusting their lives to a human plan. Everyone dies eventually, he said. The only choice we have is what we die for. He activated his radio and set it to record. Whatever happened in the next few hours, he wanted someone to remember. This is Lieutenant Kim Tae-ho of the Human Defense Corps, he said into the device. If you are hearing this, it means I did not make it out, but maybe my friends did. Maybe the information they carry will help end this war. He paused, thinking of his homeworld, of his family, of all the humans and aliens who were counting on soldiers like him to protect them. I want you to know something, he continued. Humans are not the strongest species, we are not the smartest or the fastest, but we have one thing that no enemy can take away from us. We choose to stand up, even when we know we cannot win, even when standing up means we die. The sound of metal legs echoed from the valley below. The Vorthons had found their trail. Tae-ho looked at his companions one last time. Go! Run fast and do not look back. Make sure the galaxy remembers what happened here. As his friends disappeared into the mountain paths, Taiho took his position at the narrow entrance to the pass. He could see the first Vorthon war machine approaching. It was 3 times his height and covered in weapons. Behind it came others. Lieutenant Kim Tae-ho checked his rifle one more time. 12 shots left. He had calculated that he would need at least 200 to stop them all. The odds were impossible. The enemy was too strong. But Taiho smiled as he raised his weapon. Sometimes impossible just meant you had to be creative. The first explosion echoed through the mountains like thunder. 3 months had passed since the battle at Kepler 442b. The war continued across the galaxy, but something had changed. In the Coalition Command Center on Arcturus Station, 4 survivors sat around a metal table. They looked different now. Older, changed by what they had seen. Relax stared at a data pad in his massive clawed hands. The screen showed human military history. Pictures of ancient battles, stories of soldiers who had fought against impossible odds. The Saurid warrior had been reading these files for weeks. I do not understand, he said to the others. How can a species survive when they keep throwing themselves into battles they cannot win? Yunmina looked up from her medical reports. She had saved 17 lives in the past month. Each time she worked on a wounded soldier, she thought about Taeho's words, about choosing what to die for. Maybe that is exactly why we survive, she said quietly, because we do not give up even when we should. Quinn shifted in her chair. Light danced across her crystalline body as she moved. Her mathematical mind had been analyzing the human concept of sacrifice for weeks. The numbers did not make sense, but somehow the results spoke for themselves. The tactical data Lieutenant Taiho provided has been distributed to all coalition forces, she reported. Our success rate against Vorthon machines has increased by 43%. We have won 6 major battles using his frequency analysis. Boros nodded his huge head. The Thurian warrior had been quiet since their escape from the mountain pass. His people valued strength above all else, but he had seen a different kind of strength in that narrow canyon, a strength that had nothing to do with muscle or size. The battles we win are not the important part, Boros said slowly. It is how we win them. Our soldiers fight differently now. The door to the meeting room opened. Park Ji-woo walked in carrying a stack of reports. She was a human cultural attaché, assigned to help different species understand each other. Her job had become much more important since Kepler 442b. I have been tracking something interesting, Ji-woo said as she sat down. The story of what happened in the mountain pass is spreading through our forces, but each species is telling it differently. She opened her first report. The Sarid squadrons are calling Taiho the small warrior who became large. They say he proved that true strength comes from the heart, not from the body. Relak looked uncomfortable. His people had always believed that physical power was the only power that mattered, but the human sacrifice had made him question everything he thought he knew about strength. What about the Vithrak? Quinn asked. Ji-woo smiled. They call him the calculator of impossibility. They say he used pure logic and determination to multiply his effectiveness beyond all mathematical probability. And the Thurians? The giant in small form. They believe he showed that the size of someone's spirit matters more than the size of their body. Boros made a sound that might have been laughter. My people are not wrong. I have never met anyone as large as that small human. Mina leaned forward. But why is the story spreading? Why do the alien soldiers care about one human's death? Ji-woo pulled out another report. This one was marked with high security codes. Because it is not just spreading through our forces anymore. Intelligence reports say the story has somehow reached Vorthon-controlled worlds. The room fell silent. The Vorthon Empire controlled dozens of species through fear and overwhelming force. They had conquered half the galaxy by convincing everyone that resistance was useless. How is that possible? Quinn asked. Their communication networks are completely isolated. Escaped prisoners, smugglers, traders who work both sides. Ji-woo explained. Stories travel in ways that governments cannot control, and this story seems to travel faster than most. She opened the classified report. 3 Vorthon mining worlds have had worker uprisings in the past month. 2 prison planets have had escape attempts. On Vorthon Theta, an entire slave species stopped working for 6 days. Rylak looked up from his data pad. What did they want? Nothing specific. They just stopped. When the Vorthons asked why, the slaves said they were remembering someone who would not stop fighting. Boros stood up and walked to the window. Outside, coalition ships moved through space like points of light. Some carried soldiers to new battles. Others brought wounded back for medical care. All of them carried crews that had heard the story of Lieutenant Kim Taiho. I have been thinking about something, the big Thurian said. Before the mountain pass, I thought humans were weak because they died easily. Now I think maybe humans are strong because they are not afraid to die. Mina shook her head. Taiho was afraid. I could see it in his eyes. He was terrified. Then, why did he stay? Relak asked. Because being brave does not mean you are not scared, Mina replied. It means you do what is right even when you are scared. Ji-woo had been listening to their conversation with interest. Her job was to help aliens understand human culture. But these 4 survivors understood it better than most humans did. There is something else, she said. Command wants to know if we should try to control how the story spreads. Some officers think it might be getting distorted, Quinn calculated quickly. The mathematical probability of controlling information flow across multiple species and star systems approaches 0. Besides, Boros added, why would we want to control it? The story is helping us win. Relak looked at his data pad again. He had been reading about a human battle called Thermopylae. 300 soldiers against an army of thousands. They had all died, but their sacrifice had inspired their people to victory. "I want to tell you something," the Saurid warrior said. "On my homeworld, we have a saying, 'Only the strong deserve to be remembered.' But I think we were wrong." He showed them the screen. Pictures of human soldiers from different wars, different times. All of them had fought against superior forces. Most of them had died, but their stories lived on. "Maybe it is not about being strong enough to win," Relak continued. "Maybe it is about being strong enough to keep fighting even when you know you will lose." 2 weeks later, Mina was working in a field hospital when a wounded Thurian soldier was brought in. He had been fighting on the front lines against a Vorthon assault force. His injuries were severe, but he would live. As Mina worked on his wounds, the soldier spoke in a weak voice. "Doctor, do you know the story of the human who held the mountain?" Mina paused in her work. "Yes, I knew him." The soldier's eyes widened. "You knew the small giant? Tell me, was he really as brave as they say?" Mina thought about Teho's last moments, about the fear in his eyes and the determination in his voice, about the choice he had made to let others live. "He was just a person," she said quietly, "scared and tired like the rest of us. But when the time came to choose, he chose to stand." The soldier nodded and closed his eyes. "My unit was surrounded yesterday. We were ready to surrender. Then our sergeant told us the story of the mountain pass. He said the human had shown us that surrender is always a choice, not a requirement." "What did you do?" "We fought. And we won." The soldier smiled weakly. "The Vorthons were not expecting us to keep fighting when the situation was hopeless. I think maybe they do not understand hope." That night, Mina sent a message to her family on Earth. She told them about Lieutenant Kim Teho, about his sacrifice and how it had changed everything. She did not know if they would understand why one soldier's death mattered so much. But across the galaxy, in a dozen different languages, soldiers were telling the same story. Each version was different. Each one emphasized different details. But they all carried the same message. Sometimes one person's refusal to give up can change everything. The story was growing. It was spreading like fire through the coalition forces and beyond, and with each telling, it became stronger. Lieutenant Kim Teho had died holding a mountain pass, but his story was still fighting, carried forward by every person who heard it and understood what it meant. The war was far from over, but for the first time since the Vorthons had begun their conquest, people across the galaxy were beginning to believe that victory was possible. Not because they were stronger than their enemies, but because they had learned something the Vorthons did not understand. Hope could not be killed with weapons, and stories could not be conquered with fear. 6 months after the mountain pass, the war had changed. Coalition forces were winning battles they should have lost. Alien soldiers who had once avoided fighting alongside humans now requested human partners. Something powerful was moving through the galaxy, and it had nothing to do with weapons or ships. Li Dongyun sat in his small office aboard the coalition flagship, surrounded by recordings and reports. As a human historian, his job was to document the war for future generations. But lately he had been documenting something else entirely, something that seemed more important than battles or strategy. He played another recording. This one came from a Vithrak science ship that had been captured by Vorthon forces 3 weeks ago. The crew had refused to surrender their research data, even under torture. When asked why, they had spoken about a human who had shown them that some things were worth dying for. Dongyun made notes as he listened. The story was changing again, growing, becoming something larger than the man who had inspired it. A knock on his door interrupted his work. Kang Somin entered, carrying a sealed data case. She was a human intelligence officer, one of the best in the coalition. Her face showed the kind of tiredness that came from seeing too many classified reports. "I have something you need to see," Somin said. She activated a secure hologram projector. Images filled the air between them. Vorthon prison, camps, mining colonies, factory worlds where enslaved species worked until they died. "What am I looking at?" Donghyun asked. Revolution, Somin replied simply. These images were taken over the past 2 months. Look at the patterns. Donghyun studied the hologram. In the first image, workers on a mining world had stopped production for 1 day. In the second, prisoners had refused to work for 3 days. In the third, an entire slave species had destroyed their factory rather than keep making weapons for their masters. They are all connected, Somin continued. Our agents have confirmed it. The story of your mountain pass human has reached deep into Vorthan territory. How? Escaped prisoners carry it from world to world. Traders whisper it in hidden markets. Even some Vorthan soldiers have heard versions of it. Somin manipulated the hologram showing new data. The Empire is starting to panic. They have never faced rebellion on this scale. Donghyun leaned back in his chair. When he had started documenting the war, he had expected to write about battles and generals. Instead, he was watching a story reshape the galaxy. Show me the latest versions, he said. Somin activated another set of recordings. The first came from a prison planet called Vorthan 7. An old Saurid prisoner was speaking to a group of younger aliens from different species. The human was not large, the old Saurid said in his gravelly voice. But when the metal monsters came, he did not run. He stood in the narrow place and said, "You will not pass while I live." And for 6 hours, they did not pass. The second recording came from a factory world. A Thurian slave was teaching the story to newly captured prisoners. Size means nothing, the Thurian explained. The human was smaller than my arm, but his heart was larger than a battleship. When he chose to fight, he became a giant among giants. The third recording was different. It came from a Vorthon interrogation room. The prisoner was a Vithrak scientist who had been caught helping slaves escape. Why do you resist? The Vorthan interrogator demanded. You know we will kill you. The Vithrak's crystalline body flickered with inner light. Because a human once showed us that dying for others is not failure. It is the highest form of mathematics. One life spent to save many lives equals infinite value. Donghyun felt chills as he listened. The story had traveled across hundreds of light years, passed between dozens of species, translated into languages that had no words for human concepts like sacrifice and honor. But somehow, the essential truth remained. There is more, Somin said. She showed him intelligence reports from active battlefields. Our frontline commanders are reporting strange behavior in enemy forces. Vorthan soldiers are hesitating in battle. Their slave troops are surrendering at the first opportunity. Why? Because hope is contagious, and the Vorthans built their empire on the belief that hope was impossible. That same day, on the other side of the galaxy, a coalition strike force found itself surrounded on the planet Rigel 4. The mixed unit of humans, Saurids, Vithraks, and Thurians had been cut off from reinforcements. Their ammunition was running low. Their position was hopeless. Commander Hayes, a human officer, looked at his diverse crew. 3 months ago, these aliens would have blamed human weakness for their situation. Now they looked to him for leadership. Sir, said Corporal Iko, a young Saurid soldier, what are your orders? Hayes checked his weapon. Like Taiho before him, he had more enemies than bullets. But unlike Taiho, he was not alone. We hold this position, Hayes said firmly. No retreat, no surrender. The aliens around him nodded. They had heard this before in different words from different voices, but the meaning was always the same. Remember the mountain pass, whispered Sergeant Nalo, a Vithrak engineer. Remember the small giant, added Private Korvac, a massive Thurian, as the enemy closed in. Something extraordinary happened. The diverse group of soldiers began repeating fragments of Taiho's final transmission. Not word for word, because most of them had never heard the original recording, but they spoke the ideas that had grown from his sacrifice. We choose to stand, said the humans. Some things are worth dying for, said the Saurids. One life spent. For many equals infinite value, said the Vithraks. The size of the spirit matters more than the size of the body, said the Thurians. They fought for 4 hours against overwhelming odds. They held their position until reinforcements arrived. When the battle was over, the survivors could not explain exactly why they had refused to give up. But they all mentioned the story of a human who had held a mountain pass alone. News of their victory spread quickly through coalition forces. Another impossible battle won through determination and sacrifice. Another proof that the story was more than just words. But the most important audience for their victory was not the coalition. It was the Vorthon Empire itself. In the imperial capital, Vorthon leaders studied reports from across their territory. Rebellions were spreading. Slave species were refusing to work. Even loyal Vorthon soldiers were questioning their orders. "What has changed?" demanded the Supreme Commander. "Why are our subjects suddenly willing to die instead of obey?" His intelligence chief activated a hologram showing the spread of rebellions across Vorthon space. "It appears to be connected to a story, Supreme Commander. A tale about a human soldier who died fighting our forces." "One human? One dead soldier is causing all of this?" "Not the soldier himself, sir. The idea of the soldier. The concept that resistance is possible even against superior force." The Supreme Commander studied the map. Red dots showed worlds in open rebellion. Yellow dots showed worlds with growing unrest. There were far too many of both. "How do we fight an idea?" he asked. The intelligence chief had no answer. The Vorthon Empire had conquered the galaxy through superior technology and overwhelming force. They had never faced an enemy that could not be shot or bombed into submission. Stories, they were learning, were bulletproof. On a distant mining world, a Thurian slave named Brack told the story of the mountain pass to his work crew. He had never met a human. He had never seen Earth or heard of Lieutenant Kim Tae-ho, but he had heard the story from another slave, who had heard it from a smuggler, who had heard it from an escaped prisoner. "The human knew he would die," Brack said as they rested between shifts. "But he also knew that his friends would live. So he chose death for himself so that life could continue for others." An older Saurid slave listened carefully. "What happened to his friends?" "They carried his story to their people, and his people carried it to other people, and now we carry it to each other." "But we are not human," said a young Vithrak. "Why? Should their story matter to us?" Brack looked at the metal walls of their prison, at the chains on their arms, at the guards who watched them with weapons ready. "Because the story is not about being human," he said quietly. "It is about being free." That night, for the first time in 20 years of slavery, Brack refused to work. Then his crew refused. Then the entire mine refused. The story was spreading like fire through dry grass, and everywhere it went, the impossible began to seem possible. Lieutenant Kim Tae-ho had died 6 months ago in a mountain pass on a distant world, but his story was still fighting, still winning battles, still changing the galaxy one heart at a time. The Vorthon Empire was learning what humans had always known. Some weapons could not be stopped by armor or shields. Hope was one of them, and hope once lit was very hard to put out. The Vorthon Empire was dying, and they knew it. Not from battle losses or failed campaigns, but from something they could not fight with weapons. In the highest tower of their capital world, Supreme Commander Vex studied reports that made no sense to his military mind. 17 worlds in open rebellion, 43 mining operations shut down by striking workers, entire slave armies refusing to fight for their masters, all because of a story about one dead human soldier. "Bring me the human expert," Vex ordered his aide. An hour later, Cho Hyunwoo was escorted into the command chamber. The human xenopsychologist had been captured 3 weeks ago during a raid on a research station. He looked tired and thin, but his eyes remained sharp and curious. "You study alien minds," Vex said without introduction. "Explain this madness to me." He activated a hologram showing the spread of rebellions across Vorthon space. Red dots marked worlds where the Empire had lost complete control. Yellow dots showed worlds where unrest was growing. There were hundreds of them. "Your people are destroying my empire with a story," Vex continued. "A simple tale about a soldier who died. How is this possible?" Hyunwoo studied the hologram carefully. He had been tracking the spread of Taeho's story for months before his capture. Seeing it from the Vorthon perspective was fascinating and terrifying. "Commander," Hyunwoo said slowly, "you built your empire on a single idea. That resistance is useless, that your power is absolute, that fighting back only leads to death." "Because it is true," Vex replied. "We have superior technology, superior numbers, superior firepower." "Yes. But you made one mistake. You assumed that victory and defeat are the only outcomes that matter." Vex leaned forward. His alien features showed confusion. "What else could matter?" Hyunwoo smiled sadly. "Hope, dignity, the knowledge that you tried. Humans have always understood something that your people never learned. Sometimes how you lose is more important than whether you win." "That makes no sense." "Let me tell you about my species, Commander. We are weak. We are small. We live short lives and break easily. For most of our history, we have been conquered by stronger neighbors. But we have one quality that has kept us alive for thousands of years." "Which is?" "We tell stories. We remember the people who stood against impossible odds. We teach our children about heroes who died so that others might live. And those stories make us stronger than any weapon you could build." Vex activated another display. This one showed Vorthon interrogation centers across the Empire. Captured, rebels from dozens of species, all telling variations of the same story. "We have tried to counter your propaganda," Vex said. "We broadcast the truth. That your soldier died uselessly. That his sacrifice changed nothing. That resistance only brings pain." "And how well has that worked?" Vex's silence was answer enough. "Commander, you are fighting the wrong battle. You are trying to defeat facts with facts. But this is not about facts, it is about meaning." Hyunwoo pointed to one of the interrogation recordings. A young Saurid prisoner was being questioned about why he had joined the rebellion. "Listen to his words," Hyunwoo said. "He does not talk about winning or losing. He talks about standing up, about refusing to kneel, about being worthy of the story he carries." On the recording, the Saurid spoke with quiet determination. "The Teo, small warrior, showed us that death is not the worst thing that can happen to a person. Living without dignity is worse." Vex turned off the recording. "Your soldier is dead. Your story is just words. Words cannot stop plasma cannons or war machines." "Can they not?" Hyunwoo asked. "Then why are your slave armies deserting? Why are your mining colonies shutting down? Why are your own soldiers hesitating to fire on prisoners?" Before Vex could answer, an alarm began sounding throughout the command center. Officers rushed to their stations as reports flooded in from across the Empire. "Supreme Commander," called his intelligence chief, "we are receiving surrender requests from 7 Vorthon garrison commanders. They say their troops refuse to fight against civilian populations." "Impossible," Vex snapped. "Vorthon soldiers do not refuse orders." "Sir, they are saying the same thing in every report. They cannot see the point in fighting people who welcome death rather than surrender." Hyunwoo listened to the reports with growing amazement. The story had reached even deeper than he had imagined. Vorthon soldiers, the backbone of the Empire, were being infected by the same ideas that had inspired the rebellions. "You see, Commander," Hyunwoo said quietly, "your soldiers are not machines. They are thinking beings. And thinking beings eventually ask themselves why they fight. For most of your empire's history, the answer was simple. You fought because you were stronger and victory was certain." "We are still stronger," Vex insisted, "but victory is no longer certain. Your enemies are no longer afraid to die. And when people stop fearing death, they become very dangerous." Another alarm sounded. This time it was from the prison levels below the command center. "Sir," reported a security officer, "the prisoners are refusing to return to their cells. They are not fighting us, but they will not move." "How many prisoners?" "All of them, sir. Nearly 3,000 beings from 40 different species." Vex stared at Hyunwoo. "What did you do?" "Nothing, Commander. I have been in your custody for weeks. But stories do not need their original tellers to spread. They take on lives of their own." Down in the prison levels, something remarkable was happening. Jiang Minji, a human communications specialist captured during the same raid as Hyunwoo, stood before a crowd of prisoners from across the galaxy. She had been telling them about Lieutenant Kim Tae-ho. He was not a special person, Minji was saying. He was scared and tired and far from home, but when the moment came to choose between safety and sacrifice, he chose to protect others. The prisoners listened in dozens of languages, but somehow they all understood. The story had been translated and retold so many times that it had become universal, a tale that belonged to every species that had ever faced oppression. What happened? To his friends? Asked a Thurian prisoner. They lived, Minji replied. They carried his story to the galaxy, and now the galaxy carries his story to the stars. An old Vithrak raised her crystalline hand. But we are prisoners. We cannot carry stories anywhere. Minji smiled. Every person you meet is a chance to share the story. Every conversation is a seed that might grow into hope. The Vorthons can lock up our bodies, but they cannot lock up our words. That night, in whispered conversations across the prison complex, the story spread to new ears. Guards heard it from prisoners. Maintenance workers heard it from guards. Soon, even the Vorthon staff were discussing the human who had held a mountain pass against impossible odds. Back in the command center, Vex watched his empire crumble in real time. More worlds were declaring independence, more garrison commanders were refusing orders, more slave species were choosing freedom over safety. This is madness, he said to Hyunwoo. Your people are destroying everything we built. No, Commander, we are revealing what you built. An empire based on fear can only survive as long as people remain afraid. But fear is not the strongest emotion in the universe. What is stronger? Hyunwoo looked out at the stars through the command center's windows. Somewhere out there, Lieutenant Kim Tae-ho had died in a mountain pass. His body was gone, but his story lived on in the hearts of billions of beings he had never met. Hope, Commander. Hope is stronger than fear. Love is stronger than hate. And stories are stronger than weapons. As if to prove his point, another report came in. A Vorthon fleet had refused orders to bombard a rebellious world. The fleet commander had sent a message to his superiors. I cannot destroy people who remind me of the small warrior, the commander had said. There is something noble in their refusal to surrender, something that makes me ashamed of what we have become. Vex stared at the report in disbelief. His own officers were being infected by the story. The empire he had spent his life building was being torn apart by words and ideas instead of weapons and armies. How do we fight this? He asked desperately. Hyunwoo looked at the alien commander with something like pity. You cannot fight an idea whose time has come, Commander. You can only choose whether to be remembered as someone who stood in its way, or someone who helped it grow. The Vorthon Empire had learned too late what humans had always known. Some battles are not won with superior firepower. They are won with superior spirit. And Lieutenant Kim Tae-ho's spirit was winning battles across the galaxy, one story at a time. 1 year after the mountain pass, the final battle began. Admiral Han Seok-jin stood on the bridge of the Coalition flagship, watching as the largest fleet in galactic history approached the Vorthon homeworld. Ships from 100 different species filled the space around him. Human vessels flew alongside Saurid warships, Vithrak science ships, and massive Thurian battlecruisers. But Seok-jin was not thinking about the size of his fleet or the power of his weapons. In his hand, he held a small recording device, the same device that had captured Lieutenant Kim Tae-ho's final words 1 year ago. All ships, this is Admiral Seok-jin, he broadcast across the fleet. In a few minutes, we will begin the assault on the Vorthon capital. But before we do, I want you to hear something. He activated the recording. Tae-ho's voice filled the communication channels of every ship in the fleet. This is Lieutenant Kim Tae-ho of the Human Defense Corps. If you are hearing this, it means I did not make it out. But maybe my friends did. Maybe the information they carry will help end this war. The fleet listened in silence as the recording continued. Aliens who had never met Tae-ho heard his final message. His words about choosing to stand up, even when victory seemed impossible. His belief that humans were not the strongest or smartest species, but they had one thing no enemy could take away: We choose to stand up, even when we know we cannot win, even when standing up means we die. When the recording ended, the fleet remained silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, voices began responding across the communication channels. "We stand with the small warrior," said Captain Rylak from his Saurid destroyer. "We calculate for infinite value," added Commander Quinn from her Vithrak science vessel. "We fight with giant spirits," declared General Boros from his Thurian battleship. The assault began not with anger or hatred, but with something the Vorthans had never faced before. Unity born from shared purpose, determination that came from believing in something larger than themselves. The Vorthan defense fleet was massive and well-armed. Their homeworld was protected by energy shields and orbital weapons platforms. By every tactical calculation, the battle should have lasted for days and cost thousands of lives. Instead, something unexpected happened. As the coalition fleet approached, Vorthan ships began powering down their weapons. Garrison commanders sent surrender signals. Defense platforms went offline without firing a shot. "Sir," reported the communications officer, "we are receiving messages from Vorthan fleet units. They are requesting permission to join our forces." Seokjin stared at the tactical display. Red dots representing enemy ships were turning green at an incredible rate. The mighty Vorthan war machine was collapsing without a fight. "Put me through to the Vorthan Supreme Commander," Seokjin ordered. A few minutes later, the hologram of Commander Vex appeared on the bridge. The alien leader looked older and more tired than he had in previous broadcasts. "Admiral Seokjin," Vex said formally, "I am prepared to discuss surrender terms." "Just like that?" Seokjin asked. "No final battle? No last stand for your empire?" Vex was quiet for a moment. Behind him, Seokjin could see Vorthan officers removing their weapons and placing them on tables. The gesture of surrender was clear. "Admiral, your human xenopsychologist taught me something during his time in our custody. He said that some battles cannot be won with superior firepower. My empire was built on the belief that fear could control any population. But your Lieutenant Taiho proved that hope is stronger than fear." Vex gestured to displays showing rebellions across his former empire. "Half my worlds have declared independence. My own officers refuse to fight. My soldiers ask me why they should kill people who remind them of your small warrior. I have no answer for them." "So you surrender?" "I surrender to an idea that has already conquered my people. Your soldier died, but his story won the war." The formal surrender took place 3 days later on the surface of the Vorthan homeworld. Representatives from every species in the galaxy gathered to witness the end of the war. But the ceremony was different from what anyone expected. Instead of triumphant speeches and victory parades, the gathering felt more like a memorial service. Too many had died. Too many worlds had been destroyed. The victory had come at a price that would take generations to fully understand. Oh, Yunji, a human teacher who had volunteered to help establish schools on former Vorthan worlds, stood before a mixed group of children. Human, Saurid, Vithrak, Thurian, and even young Vorthan sat together in the classroom. "Today I want to tell you about someone who helped end the war," Yunji said. "His name was Lieutenant Kim Taiho, and he was a very ordinary person who did something extraordinary." A young Thurian raised her massive hand. "Was he really a giant, Teacher Yunji?" Yunji smiled. "No, Kira. He was actually quite small for a human, but he had something inside him that was very large indeed." "His courage?" asked a Saurid child. "His heart?" suggested a Vithrak. "His spirit?" offered a young Vorthan. "All of those things," Yunji agreed. "And something else. He understood that sometimes the most important choice we make is not whether we win or lose, but whether we stand up for what is right." An elderly Saurid teacher named Torak entered the classroom. He had been a warrior during the war, fighting alongside humans in the final campaigns. Now he helped teach history to the new generation. "Teacher Yunji speaks truly," Torak said in his gravelly voice. "I knew many brave warriors during the war, but the small warrior was different. He showed us that true strength comes from protecting others, not from conquering them." A Vithrak engineer named Silex appeared in the doorway. Her crystalline body flickered with gentle light as she addressed the children. The human also taught us about mathematics, Silex added. He proved that one life spent to save many lives creates infinite value. This is the most beautiful equation in the universe. Finally, Nex, a reformed Vorthon officer who now worked as a counselor, joined the group. His presence made some of the children nervous, but he spoke with gentle sincerity. The lieutenant taught my people something we had forgotten, Nex said quietly, that ruling through fear creates enemies, but inspiring through hope creates friends. We spent centuries building an empire of fear. Your lieutenant showed us a better way in just a few hours. Yunji looked at the diverse group of teachers and students. A year ago, these species had been at war. Now they were working together to build something better. The most important thing about Lieutenant Taiho's story, she said to the children, is not that he was special or different from the rest of us. The most important thing is that he was ordinary. He was scared and tired and far from home. But when the time came to choose, he chose to stand. A human child raised his hand. Does that mean any of us could be heroes? Yunji looked around the room at the mixed group of children, future leaders, scientists, teachers, and artists from across the galaxy, each one carrying within them the potential to change the world. Yes, she said simply. Any of us can choose to stand when standing is needed. Any of us can choose to protect others instead of protecting only ourselves. Any of us can choose hope over fear. That evening, as the sun set over the former Vorthon capital, Yunji walked through the city with her fellow teachers. The streets were filled with beings from dozens of worlds, all working together to rebuild what the war had destroyed. Do you think it will last? Asked Torak. This peace we have built? Silex calculated probabilities in her mathematical mind. History suggests that all peace agreements eventually fail, but this peace is different. It is based on shared stories rather than shared interests. Nex nodded agreement. Stories are harder to break than treaties. Children who grow up hearing about the small warrior will remember his message even when they become adults. Yunji stopped walking and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, Lieutenant Kim Tae-ho had died in a mountain pass, holding the line so that others could live. He had believed that his sacrifice might help end the war, but he could never have imagined how completely his hope would be fulfilled. The war is over, she said quietly. But the story continues. Every time we tell children about the lieutenant, every time we choose hope over fear, every time we stand up for what is right, his story keeps fighting. Fighting for what? Asked Torak. Yunji smiled. For the kind of galaxy where no one has to die alone in a mountain pass, where different species work together instead of conquering each other, where the strongest protect the weakest instead of destroying them. High above them, ships from the coalition fleet prepared to return to their home worlds, but they carried more than just soldiers and supplies. They carried stories, stories of sacrifice and hope, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, of the power that comes from refusing to surrender. Lieutenant Kim Tae-ho had fallen in battle 1 year ago, but his story would keep fighting for as long as there were people willing to stand up, willing to protect others, willing to choose hope over fear. The human had died, but his echo would live forever, carried forward by every person who heard his story and understood what it meant. Some victories are won with weapons, others are won with words, and the most important battles of all are won with stories that refuse to die.